turning to the hurling over the weekend. We'll have Waterford against Limerick in the final this Sunday coming at Croke Park. Galway losing to Waterford 19 points to 118 in the end after leading at half-time. Galway, a really good second half from Waterford, and then Limerick 119 to Dublin's 116. Limerick manager John Kiley here speaking afterwards.
When Dublin went for the sweeper, obviously that was going to change the nature of the game, and there wasn't going to be as many scoring chances maybe created, and it did have an impact on the first half of the game. I think we coped with it very well. I think we were precise and measured in what we were doing with the ball, and I think we were solid, but at the same time it took us a long period of time to wear down the game to get to a point where we could push on. Some days you just have to grind it out, and that was for me one of those days where you just had to grind it out and just get the job done and get out. It was a bit of a frustrating game, I felt at times. When you're used to maybe being able to get into a rhythm of a game, or maybe when you're accustomed to matches getting into a rhythm, and then you come across a game that doesn't find a rhythm. It didn't find a rhythm at all today. No. Scores were hard got by both sides, and it just never got into a pattern of play, and as a result it was one of those stop-starting games. Some days you're going to come across days like this where the game is all about just the process and moving through it and backing the process. Like, that was a great challenge to us today, from that perspective, to make sure that we stuck with the process, that we didn't deviate, that we didn't get involved in other aspects of the game, that we just stuck to what we were that we came to do, and that what we know we can do. It might have been a bit more difficult than normally, but we stuck with it, and that was the most important aspect of it.
John Kiley there. Jamesie O'Connor's with us. Evening, Jamesie.
Joe, how are you?
Yeah, very well. John Kiley conceding there. It wasn't a classic in many ways. Dublin went out to make it very difficult for Limerick.
They did, and they succeeded in doing it for, I suppose, probably 40-45 minutes. But I suppose, as Kiley said, Limerick stuck to the process, believed in what they were doing, and I suppose that decisive spell, I suppose, midway through the second half, where they just put daylight between them, and Dublin were never really going to reel them in. I think, look at, obviously Limerick have been hugely impressive, Joe, right throughout the league. I mean, they picked up where they left off last September, and obviously Clare, there was a real battle in atrocious conditions in Ennis, but other than that, I mean, they have just looked like the champions they are, and they're playing with a lot of confidence. And Dublin put a bit of a roadblock for at times yesterday, but they found a way to overcome it, and still have players to come back, and they're in a very, very good place. Yeah, Limerick have used about 34 odd players across the 7 games. I was reading before the game that aside from Kilkenny, and I appreciate that's quite a few All-Irelands, but aside from Kilkenny, outside of Kilkenny, the last team to follow up a Liam McCarthy win with a league title is Galway back in '88. So it's not a done thing necessarily for an All-Ireland winning team to rebound spectacularly in spring. But Limerick are really doing that. 34 players used. There's a verve about them. You suspect, or you look at them and you think, this is a young team who want more. Yeah, and they're on record as saying that, and why wouldn't they? And listen, it's been really impressive how well they've managed it. Now, there is the caveat, Joe, that Tip, I suppose, after winning it in 2016 and 2017, looked like they were going really, really well, and then went pear-shaped in the league final against Galway, and then they never really recovered from it. And it's not, you've the stats back it up. It's not easy to do it, to put back-to-back titles together and to follow up Liam McCarthy with the league title. And I'm sure John Kiley and Paul Kinnerk and the Limerick backroom team, sat down and probably looked at all that and said, okay, what mistakes have been made in the past, and why haven't counties been able to retain it? And it's still only March. I mean, there's still a lot of hurling to be played between now and September. But one of the things I think that's important, in retaining it, if you're going to do it, is you have to have competition. You have to have, guys looking over their shoulder, no complacency in terms of what the starting 15 is going to be, and that's what Limerick appear to have is genuine depth and genuine depth in most positions on the field, and therefore that I think is one of the biggest positives for them to take going forward. That okay, they probably had the strongest panel last year, but if anything they've added further depth, and that augurs well, I suppose, for the championship and the league final going ahead. No team is perfect, obviously, but if there was anywhere they were short, is there anywhere that jumps out at you? There isn't really. I mean, again, like the full forward line yesterday, Graham Mulcahy was back, and now Owen O'Donnell was very, very physical with him, and but Mulcahy hasn't a whole lot of league games played, and I suppose given his age profile, and given that he's a top of the ground player and how important and how well he played last year, that's no great surprise. But Aaron Gillan and Peter Casey were the others in the full forward, and Seamus Flanagan only came on. So that's an area of the pitch where that often decides. Have you got the marquee forwards? Have you got the real guys that can do the damage? We'll say in when the pressure really comes on. And as I said, Casey's going to be fighting to get into that full forward line, and he's a really good player. And I honestly don't see, Joe, any weaknesses or any glaring weaknesses in the team. I mean, okay, Mike Casey, you'd have said maybe he was maybe a stopgap full-back last year, but look at how well he played, and look at how he grew into the position, how particularly he handled Johnny Glynn in that Ireland final. So he was back on the field yesterday. So it's where are the weaknesses? I mean, if anything, Paddy O'Loughlin has been impressive. He's like another version of Diarmaid Byrnes on the opposite flank of the defence. Dan Morrissey has showed that he's capable of doing the job at centre back. If Hannon isn't available, he stepped in there when he went off last year against Cork. So this is a team and a panel, as I said, that you just don't see where the weaknesses are. But they weren't very, very far ahead of the opposition last year, and the pack will have more evidence gathered on them in terms of how we actually go about discommoding these guys and how we go about breaking them down. And it's still not a foregone conclusion by any means that they might even come out of Munster. We mentioned that Dublin certainly tried to frustrate Limerick, as you might expect them to, and it did work for a time. Like, they did lead on 27 minutes. They were 8 points to 7 up at that stage. They knocked over 3 frees. So you would have to say they were certainly in the game and going reasonably well. It didn't seem like a lot of people watching the game were enjoying it, though. Eddie Brennan certainly caught the eye on Twitter yesterday. God, this is ugly hurling, as near as it gets to all-out defending, which has destroyed Gaelic football. Dublin coming up with a plan to saturate between the 45s, frustrating Limerick. Michael Duignan, talking more generally, said, I know I'll be considered old school by the modern men, but the short passing in hurling's gone way over the top. That was a feature right across yesterday. Saw Gerlach Nan in the Star today saying the league campaign has been desperate. So much play concentrated on that middle third, it's become very congested. Were you watching Dublin and thinking to yourself, I want no part of this, I hate everything about this? Or was there an understanding kind of admiration for a team trying to tactically outmanoeuvre a more talented opposition? Well, I think, if you look back to the way Limerick play, though, Joe, and even the way Clare play at times, I mean, it's, often there's, 1, 2 Clare forwards or 1 or 2 Limerick forwards in the opposition half of the pitch, and the Limerick half forwards, Hagerty and Tom Morrissey and Kyle Hayes are often foraging deep in the middle third and into their own half back line. And so what Dublin did yesterday, I mean, was, I suppose, play to their strengths. I mean, it's nothing too dissimilar to what Dublin were doing last year in terms of Sean Moran, playing as a sweeper, playing 7 at the back, working very, very hard half forwards, dropping deep and playing a 1-2 man inside line. So, I don't think it's fair to maybe just say that, listen, this was Dublin setting out to stop Limerick. But certainly some of the games Limerick had involved in, and even some of the stuff in the Clare Limerick game that was played in atrocious conditions, was very, very pleasing on the eye. And there were still at times yesterday. I mean, obviously Keane Lynch's pass, to Seamus Flanagan for the goal, I mean, was a fantastic movement. But certainly there was so much congestion in the middle third of the field yesterday that we saw fewer elements of that, or fewer signs of that than we'd probably like. And it was just stop-start. There was no real flow to it. Both teams, I think, wouldn't be happy with the way they used the ball. Certainly Dublin in the second half hit an amount of ball straight down, the toward the opposition sweeper, and the Limerick's extra man at the back, gobbled up ball after ball after ball. Diarmaid Byrnes or whoever it was happened to be free at that point in time. So Dublin wouldn't be happy about that. But that's the way the game has gone, Joe. There's an absolute premium now on possession, keeping possession. But you'd like to think that come high summer, and maybe there'd be more space, there'd be more of an effort to create space, that we'll certainly see a higher standard than we got yesterday. And there's no doubt about it. I mean, the lads, I think, have been fair in terms of their criticism that it wasn't easy on the eye, certainly for large chunks of it. Mm.
And is that specifically, though, because of the tactics, or because the way mistakes were being made, and it's the time of year and various things? Like, if the same tactics happen in June, July, it won't be as bad.
To a large part of it, yeah, and maybe guys maybe not been as sharp, or touch maybe not being, or the handling maybe not been as accurate, as precise as it might be, we'll say, when, you know, you're getting ready for the first round of the Munster-Leinster Championship in May, when, you know, you have that ball worked on maybe on the faster pitches and the faster surfaces, and players are just that bit sharper. So yeah, it wasn't easy on the eye, and it was, you know, pretty dire stuff for long periods of the game, and it certainly wasn't a memorable game. But league semi-finals I think in general, Joe, have more often than not, you know, been disappointing, and that's not just today or yesterday. We can say that.
Where are tactics going in the game? Like over the next 4 or 5 years, what are all the trends pointing towards?
Again, listen, an absolute premium on possession, keeping possession, you know, not giving it away, and I suppose obviously trying to deny space at one end of the field and trying to create it at the other. Yeah. And I don't think that's necessarily too different from what Kilkenny were trying to do, you know, when they were in their pomp. I mean, there were often times when, you know, you saw maybe 10, 11, 12 Kilkenny players maybe inside their own 45, inside their own maybe 21 at times, in games, you know, when they were ahead, and that's the way the game has gone, where, you know, you get bodies in the middle third, you, as I said, try to deny the opposition space and create it at your own end, and obviously managements are going to, as technology evolves as well, you know, there's going to be more analysis done on puck outs and you know, how we go about engineering this. But certainly that's where the game is at the moment, and that's the single biggest change, that it's about possession now, and it's about, you know, accurate hand passing, stick passing, and not giving that ball away. And you know, but Joe, we're having this conversation off the back of what was probably the greatest hurling championship in history. Yeah. You know, so I wouldn't be too despondent just yet. I still think that, you know, the game has been played at a very, very high level. Skill levels are higher than they ever were, and I think that when things speed up, coming championship, you know, I think we're in for a cracking summer. Yeah,
I kind of would have thought so as well. That's why it's always so striking when you see really influential and intelligent hurling voices looking at the game and saying, I don't like where this is going. I'm not enjoying this at all. This is not the game that we fell in love with.
Well, listen, again, people are like, you know, we can hark back to the days of ground hurling and overhead hurling, and you know, and wasn't it fantastic? But then you look back at some of the footage, you know, from, you know, even some of the games in the 90s, you know, I suppose maybe, you know, we have great memories of them, but you look back at them now and they seem slower. You know, we were lashing ball away, and there was lots of mistakes been made, and, you know, I think we won the All-Ireland or whatever in you know, 113 to 27, something like that, or you know, in 1995, you know, 113, like most teams have that on the board now at half time. Yeah. You know, and is the game better for it? Well, certainly, I thought there were so many memorable games in last year's championship, Joe, that you know, I certainly think that it's been played at a higher level now. And yes, it's, you know, it's become more tactical, and it's become more analytical, but that's just the way it's going, and that's not going to, the clock isn't going to turn back anytime soon, you know. But I thought last year's championship was superb.
I'm not sure when the last time the Galway hurlers didn't score for 28 minutes was. It was kind of an extraordinary game yesterday. You went in at the break and Waterford had that goal just before half time, and you thought really Galway could well be ahead by more and they're going to win this one out easily enough. And then, well, it all changed in the second half. What changed in that second half for you?
I don't know, Joe, and I suspect that Micheál Donoghue was struggling to get his head around what exactly happened. I mean, I think, listen, obviously, you know, the wides count, I mean, tells its own story. I mean, Galway certainly had chances. There was some aimless shooting, but there were worrying signs for me about Galway that sometimes, you know, if Canning isn't doing it, you know, they appear in a way kind of rudderless or leaderless, and guys are still prone to making, you know, poor decisions on the ball. You know, Niall Burke again at some, you know, just bad decisions, as I said, that, you know, wrong options been taken, and, you know, for all their qualities, you know, there's still an element of that at times about Galway that just baffles you, that, you know, you wonder, how are they in this position? You know, for a team with the experience they have, most of these guys have a lot of medals in their back pockets. Now, obviously, the goal, Joe, was a key moment in the game, and against Wexford, you know, they obviously coughed up again a couple of really cheap goals that you know, they could have paid a very, very heavy price for against the wind, you know, in Salthill that day. And again, you know, you have to take into account that, okay, Fergal Flannery, you know, is playing. It isn't Dahi Burke that's standing outside him. Ronan Burke, that they don't maybe have that same level of understanding. And it was a dreadful goal to give away, you know, in the circumstances, and one that you couldn't be happy about. So that certainly gave Waterford hope and gave them a foothold in the game. But still, the position Galway were in with the wind to come, you know, they shouldn't have lost that game. And somehow this morning they're waking up, you know, wondering why. And that for me, you know, is troubling.
I saw John Fogarty described the Galway team as a B+ team in terms of their strength. So that's about where they were pitching up. Because on the canning point and how they can look rudderless at times without him, that's interesting, because for so long, up until that All-Ireland winning year, the criticism of Galway was that there was too much reliance on canning, and then it seemed like we had crossed a threshold where that reliance was gone, that Canning was just a very, very important cog in a wheel now. But that reliance on him hasn't quite gone to the extent that Galway might like.
Yeah, I mean, listen, in 2017, you just sensed, I mean, you know, the league final against Tip, you know, the way they bossed that game, the way, you know, physically they imposed themselves on Tip, and the way they played, you know, right throughout the championship in 2017, you know, it was a quantum leap forward, I think, for that side in terms of, you know, as you said, just the strength and depth that they seem to have. You know, Conor Whelan, Conor Cooney, you know, Joseph Cooney, understanding their roles and you know, physically how powerful, how dominant they were. And you just imagine that, listen, they kick on from that. And, you know, the confidence of having done it now and having the monkey off their backs and having ended the 20-year wait. And
sorry to interrupt, but for most of last year, a good chunk of last year, they looked like destined to repeat the All-Ireland success. Was the Dublin match in particular, and I think that was towards the end. Dublin were probably a bit tired, but, you know, or it was Kilkenny, wasn't it? It was Kilkenny and Galway last summer where they just, even physically, just smashed them.
Yeah, and absolutely.
And I do remember us sitting here on a Monday going, well, I mean, who's going to stop Galway this year? Nobody.
Yeah, and even, you know, you know, when they met Kilkenny again in that replay Leinster final, and Kilkenny, you know, came at them, they just kicked on again, and you got the sense that, yeah, listen, this is, you know, they are the team to beat. But that All-Ireland semi-final against Clare, you know, I suppose, listen, they had the replay in the Leinster final, and then, you know, the draw with Clare really took, I think, a lot out of them. And even if you were to go back to that second game, Joe, I mean, in the second half when, you know, Clare were coming back at them, it was really Canning alone that nearly stood up and just took on the responsibility and, you know, just grabbed the game by the scruff of the neck, and I think got Galway over the line. And even then, O'Donnell's obviously chance at the end, we're still having nightmares about in Clare. But yeah, there's just a sense of Galway at the moment that you just wonder, you know, where are they? And have Cathal Mannion, for example, or have Niall Burke, or has Jason Flynn, you know, or Conor Whelan kicked on to the extent that they might, or that we maybe thought that they might, or that Galway supporters would have hoped that they might. Now, the flip side to that, Joe, is that, you know, there's 7 weeks to the first round of the championship. Obviously, they haven't had the St. Thomas's players. David Burke is a hugely important player for them. Conor Cooney comes back into the team. You know, Joseph Cooney hasn't played. Johnny Cohn has been kind of, you know, hasn't seen a huge amount of game time either. And obviously Dahi Burke.
Yeah. And
the goalkeeping situation as well. So I mean, when Galway get their best 15 on the field, they're going to be a force.
Yeah.
But you still get the sense, Joe, that, you know, Canning is massively important to that team. You know, and his health and well-being is still vital for Galway's chances in 2019.
Well, the good news is it seems like it's a dead leg. He was stretchered off yesterday. It's a dead leg, so he'll be ready come championship time. What about Waterford then? Tommy Welch certainly stopped a few of us in our tracks earlier on in the year when he reckoned that Waterford could win the All-Ireland. It looks less outlandish now to be saying that. Yeah,
but again, like, Joe, they were, you know, beaten in the final in, you know, 2017, and you know, like, a lot of us forget that, you know, there was a point in that time, they got off to a dreadful start, but there was a point in that time when I think was it Kevin Moran had a chance to put them maybe too clear, and I think he missed it, and suddenly Galway got level and got ahead and you know, and kicked on. But, you know, they're a good side with a lot of good players, with a lot of experienced players. And like, you know, even that first match against Clare last year, again, Kevin Moran had a great chance to put them, a great goal chance that I think would have put them maybe 4 or 5 points ahead of Clare, and Donald Toohey pulled off a fantastic save, and Clare went down the other end of the pitch. John Conlon grabbed the ball, Clare got a penalty, and Peter Duggan stuck it. And in the build-up to that Waterford chance, Tadhg de Búrca broke his collarbone and went down with an injury. And the game turned 360 degrees on that moment. And Noah Connors got injured, and then Waterford players started dropping like flies, and you know, and the season, you know, fell apart, I suppose, in the space of maybe, you know, 20-25 minutes in Ennis. And
they looked like a team dead in their feet last year, really, and the lack of home advantage, and just they never got going. I guess this year you're worried about them post Eric McGrath. Would there be a hangover? Would there be a hankering for such an inspirational manager departing? But geez, you would have to say that the new man in has done really well. How different are they in terms of approach? Like, if you were to compare styles with last year, because that's been talked about a lot this year. I haven't heard your thoughts on it.
Yeah, again, well, I haven't seen enough of them, Joe, to you know, to really comment on it. I mean, obviously the you know, the personnel, he's blooded a lot of players. I mean, again, there's you know, Waterford has been in 1B. Páirc Fanning has had the chance to kind of experiment, and you know, obviously the Ballygunner players were out for the earlier parts of it. You know, the two Mannies were back yesterday, but you know, other players have stepped up. I mean, obviously the two Bennetts have been really good. Stephen has had a great league so far. Shane obviously they didn't have last year. He's back in the fold, and probably hungrier and with the appetite from the break. Caleb Lyons has been, you know, really good. Really impressed me the couple of times I've seen him. Peter Hogan, I thought was good the last against Galway. Came on yesterday, got a good score. Colin Dunford has had a run out. Gleeson is back. We've seen flashes of brilliance from him. Jamie Barron has been really consistent. Brick didn't feature yesterday, but again is back, which even his importance in the dressing room, I think, is big. You know, just to have him around, not to mind what he might actually be able to contribute on the pitch. So I just think that, you know, they didn't become a bad team, you know, on the back of last year's, you know, everything that could go wrong going wrong. And even last year, I mean, obviously they should have beaten Tip in Limerick. We know the controversial way that ended. And Cork, the Cork match went down to the wire in the last game when they really had nothing left to play for. So, like, plus throw in the fact that Walsh Park, you know, Clare have to go down there, Limerick have to travel down there. Waterford are going to have as big a say as anybody in the Munster Championship, you know, Joe. And picking 3 teams to come out of Munster at the moment, you know, it just, you know, I don't know. I have no idea what 3 teams are going to emerge. You know, and it's quite possible that Limerick go on and win the All-Ireland. It's equally not entirely implausible that Limerick don't come out of Munster. Clare, likewise, Clare mightn't come out of Munster. Cork mightn't come out of Munster. Who knows? But Waterford certainly, you know, will take huge confidence from, I suppose, first of all, beating Galway. You know, with that last second goal, I suppose, when they were under the caution in Walsh Park. And the psychology of even, you know, beating Clare down there ahead of the championship and beating Galway, and then doing it again into the breeze in the second half when, you know, they look to be dead and buried at stages early in that first half. They have to be in a good place, particularly with the players and some of the guys that they've got to come back into that team.
Yeah, they certainly seem to be. It'll be interesting, Croke Park on Sunday. Jamesie, thanks a million. Appreciate it.
Cheers, Joe.